Hello, YouTube. This will be episode 1 of a series that I'm starting, which is going to be Excalibur myth busting. And I think there's no better myth to start out with than the myth of Excalibur Prime is better than Umbra. And to sort of answer that question right off the rip, that is false. And it's false kind of with an asterisk because it's a little bit more complicated than that. And there's another myth that I'll cover in this once we get into detail on that, which is covering some specifics with Umbra that I have shown in other videos when I do discuss Excalibur Umbra's Sentience passive, but we'll recover that. We'll sort of recap that. So I think the easiest way to start this video is something I might get a comment or potentially some grief about, which is, well, you have Prime, so how much have you actually played Excalibur Umbra and base Excalibur? And I'll show you. So because I'm such a sort of lunatic level Excalibur main, because I'll get into some history here in a moment. How much have I played Excalibur Prime? Quite a lot of my actual gameplay. And then how much have I played Excalibur Umbra in comparison to that? I think quite a bit. I think I've played him quite a bit to really know the main differences mechanically, like in actual gameplay between him, including some of the differences that occur with just running base Excalibur. And I might not show this, but I have all three of these versions of these Warframes fully Omni/Umbral polarized. I have one Umbral on the Warframe here and Exalted Blade, two Umbral here, one on the Exalted Blade, and then no Umbral on base Excalibur. So to get into some history on how long I've been playing a particular way in this game. So what I started out with, I started playing back in the beta on this account, using Loki as my starter Warframe. And that was way back in like June or August or so of 2013, when I was on a free-to-play kick after quitting WoW for a while. So after I had reached part of the end game, I had run into limitations with what Loki can really do, because what I really liked doing at the time was just running around with Loki and using Kune as my melee weapon. No, this is usage way before the Incarnate. So this is way back in the beta for that. And then what I switched to very quickly, because trying to get into the Void and trying to get into farming Prime parts, no one was inviting Loki because you kind of needed particular builds, and one of the Warframes that you needed for that was Vauban when he came out as a form of crowd control. So in combination of Vauban and Necros is what I really played a lot of back in that day. And even after that, after the beta, when Necros Prime came out, I switched to running him because the same problem occurred when I switched to playing Excalibur back in the beta, which is people don't want to invite Excaliburs to a lot of gameplay, and the same occurred back way back in the beginning with Loki. Same occurred with Excalibur for a very long time. So at some point, I had farmed up enough stuff where I didn't need to play Vauban or Necros to really get invited to stuff anymore. Like a lot of exterminates in the Void and stuff like that, people weren't as lippy about with what you brought. It's mostly like the defense and stuff where you needed to be able to protect the objective. So one thing I noticed, I don't remember if this was from a patch or if this was just something that took me a little too long to realize, is that you could play melee only in this game. But there was a one sharp limitation with melee only back then, which is that melee attacks consume stamina, which was also consumed from running, from wall running, from climbing, from a lot of things. And it was a really obnoxious mechanic that those that have never seen it, be thankful you never experienced it. But there was a solution around that, which was using a Warframe with a high base stamina. And guess what? Guess who had one of the best base staminas in the game back then? Excalibur Prime. So when I bought the Founders Pack, I didn't buy it with the intent of like supporting the game or any of that nonsense. It's like, it was purely, I wanted to play Excalibur. I had already farmed at least a ton of Prime parts, if not already had Frost Prime at that point. So like, well, I'm not going to make base Excalibur and then just play base Excalibur when you can just buy the Prime version. And then he also came with a lot of platinum, enough platinum before trading, which I didn't know about at the time, unfortunately. Otherwise, I probably would have upgraded to the higher pack to be able to switch to this Warframe and then get enough potatoes and enough like Forma in order to actually polarize them, because a lot of stuff was pretty hard to get back then, and you really needed platinum to do so much in the game back then. and this is before trading. So that's why I bought him and why I switched to him. And it turns out it was very effective because I went from basically being able to keep up with the group to just outrunning the heck out of the entire group for the entire mission, because I was able to continuously sprint, because even faster warframes at the time didn't have enough energy to actually maintain their abilities. That was one of those weird things back in the beginning of the game. Like, energy economy was very difficult. Like, even during a normal mission, I had maybe 2 or 3 instances of super jump, just because you didn't get a lot of energy from stuff, except for in the void, where you can get the void orbs. So with that preface out of the way, I think that's a good synopsis of like my experience in the game. Obviously, as you've probably seen, this is just how I've played the game since then too, playing melee only. I don't have Kune as still my most used secondary by having secondaries equipped and using them. Just to show this, like, I used this when I was playing Necros a lot because it was easy, and same with this. I used this to heal Necros with Despoil, with its augment. That was one of the main reasons I used Furus. This was before the Incarnon, even though I did use the Incarnon for this one actually quite a bit. And same thing here. Daiku, my most used, because for a very long time, several years, I actually used a Safun Nikanaza with like Contagion on it, and I used the Lifesteal mod from that in order to make it a lot more powerful back before they really nerfed the heck out of health tanking. So that prefacing out of the way, I think the next thing to show, and a lot of this has to do with the fact that most people don't get to see this, which is the Codex entries for these warframes, because it'll be the easiest way to show a fundamental difference between them. So notice here, you have 240 armor, 100 base energy, and then Exalted Blade damage, Radio Javelin damage, 500, 100. If you have these versions of the Warframe, you can also cross-check this, but notice how there's higher version on Excalibur Umbra, because turns out Excalibur Umbra just basically inherited the stats of Excalibur Prime. Notice 500, 100, and then let's look at Excalibur Prime. A lot of you might have never been able to see this unless you've seen another video of what this looks like. And just a note, 500, 100, same base stats. So base stat wise, Excalibur Prime and Excalibur Umbra are the same. So where do the differences occur? And the differences occur basically in the passive, with like a little exception to his number 2. So obviously Radial Blind is what Excalibur Prime gets, which is the same exact ability as it is on base Excalibur, except, you get the fancier looking Exalted Blade. But that's with any Prime Warframe you put Radial Blind on. And then Excalibur Umbra actually gets just a better version of that, which is Radial Howl. And Radial Howl does have that sentient strip feature, which I don't have to show you that. You can see that on your own. But the other myth that we'll talk about, since we're getting into the part where we're talking about more specific differences between Prime and Umbra, is that a myth that comes up is that as Prime, I get another mod slot because of Warrior's Rest. And to put it simply, that's false, because it's based on a false premise, which is that Warrior's Rest is required, which it is not. Now, there are some builds where you really do want to run it, but it is not required. And part of that is because they fixed a lot of the bugs. And they fixed these for quite some time. And I think it went missed that these bugs were fixed because a lot of people got into the default of using Warrior's Rest. Same with myself. It wasn't up until several months ago that I stopped running Warrior's Rest to actually test and validate some of these bugs and realize these have been improperly continued on and like became FUD lore basically within the community of how of what things still were broken with this. The easiest one, the best one to discuss, is actually the way Exalted Blade works with it. So Exalted Blade doesn't get decasted when you transfer in and out, even with his sentience enabled. So there are some builds where there's really no major disadvantage to running his sentience passive, where in some of them you actually get an advantage here. And I think the obvious one that I've made a whole build guide on is discussing Bright Bonnet, which does not break. It doesn't get decasted when you transfer in and out, but then also Umbra can cast his own that actually persist when you transfer back into your Warframe. So you can actually have 4 Bright Bonnet mushrooms up at a time. The other one that has a similar interaction is actually Well of Life, which is a pretty useful one. but you do sort of really want to use this augment to fix energy problems, and then this fixes energy problems quite a lot if you use the right Archon shards. Not warranted a own build video, but if you wanted to play around with it, it gives my stamp of approval for it. So going back to this, not every scenario do you want to run Warrior's Rest. Now, one sort of unfortunate consequence of this is that if you do like running Vazarin, you don't get the immunity when you transfer back in. If you Void Sling Umbra when he's in his sentience and you transfer back in, you don't get that immunity. So that's where, as long as you're not like ferociously addicted to using Vazarin like I am on Prime, and you're using primarily something like Madurai or even Unaru or any of the other focus schools, that's one caveat to think of. So Vazarin kind of off limits if you're not disabling his passive. Now, there's some builds where it is very useful to disable his passive, one of which is on like a Warcry build. And on a Warcry build, that's where I think running Unaru is the ultimate solution to most of the problems, but you can run Vazarin because it turns out you don't need knockdown immunity if you're immune. So the combination of either Unaru or Vazarin with Warrior's Rest, that's what I run on Prime anyways. I'm not running Madurai. Even in Void Cascade, if you see some of my recent uploads for gameplay, where I'm even taking basic Excalibur up to level cap, I'm running Vazarin, and I'm running a Kava that's able to hit Thrax Ghosts in the millions. If you're curious on how that build works, I actually have a whole build guide discussing how that works. And it's showcased in most of my videos because it is extremely useful. But I think that kind of covers over the main critique that I'll get when it comes to modding. And it really does come down to, you don't need Prime Sure-Footed and you don't need Warrior's Rest. Those become optional depending on what your build and what is required. If you want to get to more detail of how to fix some of the issues, like with Exalted Blade, that can occur, because one thing that's important to note, and I cover this in a whole video, if you're curious about more detail on it, is that his Spectre has starting energy, and you can have Exalted Blade run out of energy on his Spectre, which then decasts it on your actual Warframe version of it. The simple solution around that is just starting energy, and that can be done with one shard, and that's a huge quality of life improvement that hits two birds with one stone. Okay. So, I think that pretty much covers some of the myths that can occur, and I think I'll showcase some other things that you might not know about Excalibur Prime, just as sort of like an addendum to this that might come up as questions. So, can you use versions like cosmetics, like the Prime helmet or skin on Excalibur Umbra and vice versa? The answer is no. I don't have that option. I don't even get the option of toggling Prime details like I used to. I actually used to be able to do that. It did nothing, but I used to have that. They since removed it. Where if you compare on Umbra, you get this toggle Prime details. So that's kind of the irony behind it. On the Prime version of Excalibur, you don't have toggle Prime details, but on Umbra, you do. If you wanted to see some of the differences between his base skin with Prime and just regular Excalibur, you can notice there's really nothing special about him. He's just got a slight different set of lines on him. And then you look at the back, instead of like a dark color, he's just slightly golden. So there's really not any big difference between them. And that just is what it is. He's the first Prime Warframe. He's the most basic Prime Warframe. And is there anything wrong with that? I don't know. If they wanted to give everyone a version of this Warframe and then just give me a fancy, actually primed version with crazy decals and stuff, then you can do that. I really don't care. I think most people don't care at this point. I think I do care, though, about fixing some of the lasting bugs that exist on Excalibur Umbra. I am very ravenous on the forums about making videos and posting those videos on bug reports on the forums to try to help fix them. So if you do see those, feel free to upvote them, since I prove that what I'm explaining is in fact a bug just through the video demonstration, but doesn't mean I'm always right about those things too. Yeah. I think that pretty much covers it. If you do have any questions about this difference, if there's anything you think I missed, any other myths that you've heard about Prime versus Umbra, feel free to leave them in the comments, and then I can answer those. Sort of keep it open discussion on that, because there's probably a lot of things that I haven't even heard that have come up as bugs for a while, or some sort of myth. So thanks for watching.